All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into the philosophical underpinnings of Ethereum.
Well, yeah.
Forget the price for a second, right?
Right. Yeah.
We're going deep into like the design and the political ideology driving it.
Yeah.
And we've got some really fascinating sources. We're going to be looking closely at Vitalik Buterin's proof of stake design philosophy.
Yeah.
We're also going to be referencing Ethereum's political philosophy explained.
Yeah.
And as well as Vitalik Buterin reveals true Ethereum ETH philosophy.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
To dive into.
The mission for you, the listener, is we want to give you a real clear sense of the beliefs, the values driving Ethereum's development, where it fits in the broader crypto landscape. We want to move beyond just like the technical details and really get to that why.
Totally.
So let's dive into it.
Let's jump in.
Let's start with this concept that Buterin puts forward.
Okay.
He describes crypto economic networks, like Ethereum, as almost a new form of life in cyberspace.
It's a pretty wild idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it.
It's like, wow.
Like a new life form.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
He distinguishes them from things like BitTorrent corporations, open source projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the crucial difference, he says, is this concept of state.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of state, right? Like a record, a memory of all this activity. That's what makes it distinct from these other things.
And it evolves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a history.
Exactly.
There's a shared history.
It's not just about like,
yeah.
Exchanging information at the moment.
Yeah.
There's this record, and that's what makes it a state.
Now, he connects this to what he calls the cypherpunk spirit. Can you unpack that link a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, he's basically saying that the nature of cryptography, the nature of strong encryption, naturally gives an advantage to the defendant, right?
It's hard to crack.
Exactly. Like breaking a really strong encryption, it's super difficult.
Yeah.
Even for like super powerful computers. So, he's arguing that any system that's kind of claiming that cypherpunk ethos should reflect this in its design. So in terms of security, it should be fundamentally harder to attack the system than it is to just use it normally.
Right.
So
much more expensive to attack than to defend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's really a core part of Ethereum's design. It's not about, brute force. It's about this asymmetry.
Yeah. Okay. And this is where proof of stake, or POS, comes into play.
Right. Exactly.
How does this embody that?
So this is where the idea of proof of stake really kind of shines. Because in proof of stake, the cost to attack the network becomes way higher than the cost to just participate in it and keep it secure. And he contrasts this with proof of work.
Right.
In proof of work, the resources you need to attack are roughly the same as the resources to defend.
Right, yeah.
But in proof of stake, it's this asymmetry.
There's a real ideology here shaping the technical choices.
Totally. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, beyond the cryptography itself, Buterin talks about the importance of what he calls social consensus.
Okay.
So in the context of blockchains, what does that really mean?
Yeah. This is really interesting because it gets at, where the ultimate authority of a blockchain lies.
Right.
So he's saying that even if you were to, let's say, gain control of a majority of the computing power in a proof of work system.
Right.
Or a majority of the stake in a proof of stake system, convincing the entire community, the users, the developers, that some other chain is now the real one, is an incredibly difficult, if not impossible thing to do.
It's like rewriting history on a massive scale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like trying to get everyone to agree to this completely alternate version of reality. It's just too hard.
But of course, he acknowledges that that can't be the only source of day-to-day security.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be too slow.
It would be too slow.
Right.
It would be too impractical.
Yeah.
So that's where economic consensus comes in.
Right, which provides that immediate security.
Exactly, yeah. So economic consensus, whether it's through the energy expenditure in proof of work or the capital at stake in proof of stake, that's what really provides that sort of day-to-day immediate deterrent against bad behavior.
Let's dig a little deeper into the differences between POW and PS.
Yeah.
We talked about the attack defense cost ratio. What are some other key distinctions he points out?
One of the big ones is the fundamental way that security is achieved.
Okay.
So in proof of work, security comes from, these big financial rewards that are given to miners to incentivize them to use a ton of computational power.
Right.
And so it's this constant expenditure of energy.
Right.
And, he criticizes this.
Right. He's famously said it kills trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Kills trees. And, as we were saying before, it lacks that defender's advantage.
Right.
Right. It's kind of a one-to-one.
Yeah.
In proof of stake, on the other hand, it's all about penalties.
Okay.
So in proof of stake, validators put up their own capital, security, and yes, they earn rewards.
Yeah.
But the real security comes from the risk of getting slashed.
Right. So the security isn't about how much energy you can use.
Right.
It's about how much you stand to lose.
Exactly. Exactly. And he has this great quote about it. He says, the security comes from putting up economic value at loss.
Yeah, that's a really concise way.
That's a great way to put it.
To frame it.
Yeah.
Now, what about recovering from attacks?
Okay.
Right. How do Paudo and Paras compare there?
Yeah, this is a crucial one too.
Yeah.
So in proof of work, recovering from a big attack can be really tough. Especially after the fact.
Right.
Once an attacker has rewritten the history.
Yeah.
The only real recourse you have is maybe a hard fork.
Right.
Which can be contentious.
Yeah.
And even then, the underlying vulnerability might still be there in proof of stake.
Yeah.
The community has a different tool. They could do a hard fork that specifically targets the attackers.
With malicious validators.
Exactly. Exactly.
And slash their system.
And slash their stake.
Right.
Yeah. And so he even mentions the 2016 Geth parity consensus failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
As an example of this kind of recovery effort.
Yeah.
It's not painless.
Right.
It's definitely disruptive.
Yeah.
But it's a way to recover.
Right.
And it makes the attackers pay.
Yeah.
You attack, you lose your stake.
It's a huge deterrent.
Huge deterrent.
Now, he does acknowledge, right?
Yeah.
That economics isn't...
It's not the whole picture.
It's everything.
No. Right. There's other factors at play.
Yeah.
I mean, people can have motivations beyond just pure profit.
Right.
Right.
Ideological.
Right. Yeah, you could have hacking. You could have just plain old human error.
Right.
These things happen.
Yeah.
And he also points out, interestingly,
that
moral principles can sometimes make it harder to attack.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if there's a shared sense of what's right and wrong, it can raise the cost of attacking. And even just inefficiencies in communication among attackers can actually make it harder.
Interesting.
So it's not just a pure math equation.
So ultimately the goal is to have a protocol that can work well under a lot of different
circumstances.
Yeah,
different assumptions.
Right.
Different models of behavior.
Yeah.
So, he talks about different models of economic rationality.
All right.
Like, are people coordinating?
Yeah.
Are they acting individually? Different types of fault tolerance.
Yeah.
Byzantine faults, adaptive, non-adaptive, and even behavioral economics.
Right. So, not just economic incentives,
right,
things that prevent centralization.
Yeah, you need both.
Yeah.
You need the economic incentives and you need the anti-centralization incentives.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, he touches on the speed of consensus and the trade-offs there.
Yeah.
What's his thinking on that?
So this is interesting because he's a little bit cautious about protocols that prioritize speed above all else. Right.
Yeah.
He argues that if you're pushing for super fast transaction finality, and that creates really strong incentives for centralization,
right?
Like if everyone has to use the same low latency infrastructure, then that's a risk to the network.
Right. It makes it less resilient.
Exactly. It makes it less censorship resistant.
Yeah.
So he contrasts this with protocols that maybe allow for a little bit longer message delivery times.
Yeah.
And he even mentions Ethereum's uncle mechanism as a way to mitigate those centralization risks that you can get with faster protocols.
Okay. So that was a really great kind of summary of his thinking behind proof of stake.
Totally.
Now let's broaden things out. Let's talk about the broader political philosophy of Ethereum.
Sure.
How does it contrast
with something like Bitcoin?
So this is a crucial point.
Yeah.
One of the articles we looked at talks about crypto cultures, right?
Right.
Where each cryptocurrency community kind of develops its own set of values.
Right, right. It's not just one big...
It's not just one big crypto cult.
Crypto cult.
Dominated by Bitcoin.
Right.
Right? Each chain, each community is a little bit different.
It's got its own
flavor. Its own flavor.
Right.
Exactly.
Like, think about Dogecoin.
Yeah, Dogecoin is totally different, driven by memes.
Yeah.
Or Monero, very privacy-focused.
Yeah.
So Ethereum has its own distinct point of view as well.
Bitcoin's often characterized as having this kind of right libertarian commodity theory of money.
Right, right. Scarcity, fixed supply, algorithmic authority.
Right.
Yeah.
How does Ethereum contrast with that? So, the way that Ethereum is often talked about is as this shared world computer.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being money. It's about being this neutral platform.
Right. A general purpose.
For any kind of decentralized application.
Yeah.
And so this idea of neutrality is actually very political in itself.
Right.
Because it means that Ethereum's potential impact goes way beyond just economics.
It's infrastructure.
It's infrastructure. It's public goods. Things that benefit everyone. Benefit everyone.
Right.
Exactly.
The article also talks about this connection to radical markets or radical liberalism.
Yeah.
That's the link there. Yeah.
So radical liberalism, as they describe it, is all about reimagining systems.
Yeah.
Right? Like political systems, economic systems,
right,
and exploring new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And so a concrete example of this that we see in Ethereum is quadratic voting and funding.
Right, yeah.
This idea of giving more weight to a larger number of smaller contributions.
Yeah, like Gitcoin is a good example.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's about really trying to figure out what the community wants and allocate resources accordingly.
Yeah.
And then that leads us to this really interesting concept of hyper-governance.
Right.
Right, this idea that...
Yeah, so the community's not just building tech.
Right, exactly.
It's creating the conditions for new forms of governance.
Exactly. So they're building the foundation for these new forms of governance to emerge.
Right, and these DAOs would be
a great example.
Right.
Yeah.
Decentralized autonomous organizations.
And they're seen as potential alternatives to these traditional, often flawed systems that we have in place.
Yeah. So ultimately, the article suggests this phrase, mutualist minarchism.
Oh, yeah. That's a mouthful.
As Ethereum's political philosophy.
Yeah.
So let's break that down.
Okay, sure.
What is minarchism?
So minarchism is this idea that the state should be minimal.
Okay.
Right? Its functions should be really limited to, like, the bare essentials.
Like law enforcement, national defense.
Law enforcement, national defense, maybe a basic legal framework.
Right.
But that's about it.
And it's often associated with Robert knows.
Exactly. Yeah, famously. But in the context of Ethereum, it takes on this more left libertarian flavor because the community is providing and maintaining this public good, which is the Ethereum world computer.
Right, right.
But beyond that, the goal is for minimal control or interference.
So you build the base layer?
You build the base layer. Yeah. You build the infrastructure.
But then you let people experiment.
Yeah. And
that's the minarchism part.
Yeah, exactly.
What about mutualism?
So mutualism is this idea that the community collectively provides and maintains this infrastructure.
Right.
So
it's not a state.
It's not a state. It's not a corporation.
It's not a corporation.
It's a collaborative effort
It's
among all the participants.
Right, right.
And the argument is that Ethereum, through things like DAOs, DeFi, NFTs, social tokens, all these tools, is actually aiming to provide better infrastructure than the traditional centralized entities.
Okay.
So it's almost like...
So it's not about attacking those systems.
It's not about attacking them.
It's about building something so good that people choose it.
Exactly.
Building a better mousetrap.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the article also mentions this hash bash cash model.
Oh, yeah.
How does that relate to all this?
So the hash bash cash model is this idea that, crypto cultures, including Ethereum, kind of have this cycle.
Okay.
So hashing refers to the blockchain itself.
Right. That's the underlying tech.
Yeah, the underlying tech bashing is the community discourse.
The arguments, the debates.
The arguments, the debates.
Right.
Figuring out what the values are.
Yeah.
And caching is, of course,
the money.
The money.
Right.
The economic activity.
So in Ethereum, this whole cycle is all geared towards...
It's all geared towards building and maintaining
that
shared world computer.
Infrastructure.
Right.
That infrastructure.
Right.
The public goods infrastructure.
Right.
And then on top of that, you can have all these experiments in decentralized governance.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Which is the minarchism part.
Okay. So we've explored this idea of proof and stake. We've explored this broader political philosophy. Now, our last source delves into what Buterin himself calls like the core...
The true philosophy.
The philosophy of Ethereum. So what is that?
So it's actually pretty simple, but really elegant.
Okay.
He describes the Ethereum address as a form of text, as a universal interface, right? So he's suggesting that the ETH address is becoming this fundamental tool for authorization.
Like a universal key.
Yeah, like a universal key across the entire blockchain ecosystem.
And he gives some specific examples of how this could work.
Yeah, he mentions things like skim mail, Tels Notary, and Anon-Adhar. And these are all technologies that allow you to use cryptography to prove things about your identity without revealing the underlying information. And then you can link that proof to your ETH address.
So it becomes...
So it's not just about...
More than just money.
Yeah, it's more than just sending and receiving crypto.
Yeah.
It's about...
It's your digital identity.
It's about identity. It's about authorization.
Right.
And then once you have that, you can use it in all sorts of other tools like multi-sig wallets or DAOs.
Right.
So it's this really powerful vision of this portable digital identity that you can use across the entire ecosystem.
Now, the article also touches on some, more practical, maybe controversial issues, like the Ethereum Foundation selling ETH in the past.
Right.
Which has raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, there's been some questions about that.
Yeah, so what's Buterin's thinking on that?
So he explains that one of the reasons the foundation doesn't stake all of its ETH is because they want to stay neutral during hard forks.
Right, right.
So if there's a contentious hard fork, they don't want to be seen as taking sides.
It's influencing things.
Exactly.
Okay.
So by not staking all of their ETH, they're kind of avoiding that implicit on-chain stance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To preserve neutrality.
Preserve neutrality.
He also mentions that they're exploring other models to how they manage the foundation's resources.
Exactly. So things like giving grants to people or organizations to stake independently or distributing resources across multiple organizations.
Yeah. So again, it's all about decentralization.
Exactly. It all comes back to that.
Even at the level of managing the foundation's resources.
Of the foundation itself.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put it all together.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
A lot of ground.
Right. We've gone from the very technical with proof of stake to this broad
political philosophy,
mutualist minarchism, to this fundamental idea of the ETH address.
Yeah, the ETH address
is this universal tool. So just to recap for our listener, Ethereum's design, especially with the move to proof of stake,
is really rooted in that cypherpunk ethos.
Rooted in that cypherpunk ethos.
Yeah, that idea that defense is more important than offense.
Right. Make it expensive to attack.
Exactly. Make it expensive to attack.
And then the political philosophy is often described as mutualist minarchism.
Right. This vision of a community-driven